Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Doing okay.
Good. I realized I probably should have sent you a reminder.
No. That was not. You didn't need to. I was on there. I'm on the board. We were getting our earnings call, trying to get all the stuff ready for it. So our 9 o'clock went a little longer than I thought. So anyway,
no,
sorry
no
about
problem.
that.
No problem. So last time we talked a lot about sort of the more general policy issues, and the idea of this call was that you were going to talk about Peter and what you've done. So, can you just? I've looked online to some about you, and it says you're from a Russian background. Is that true? Your family, you have a family background from Russia?
I do. I have a family background from Russia. My grandparents were from the Russian-Ukrainian border, right where all the conflict is today, actually.
Wow.
They were from a city north of Kharkov called Suma. And then during what was called the Raskulachka, which is kind of when Stalin tried to kind of beat up on all of the farmers and independent kind of businesses and throw everybody into Siberia, they were thrown into Siberia. Then they came out of those labor camps in the 30s back to the Kharkov, which is the main capital, and they lived in the southern part of Yuzhny Posyolok, it's called, in Kharkov. And so they stayed there right through World War II. And then when the Germans came through, you had two choices. You either fight the Germans, but most people, welcomed the Germans with flowers because they wanted to get rid of the communists. And the Germans went past. So they let the Germans through. But the Germans at the same time said two things. One, we're worried about you at our backs because maybe you let us through and then attack us from behind. And number two, if we were to retreat, Stalin's going to kill all of you for not fighting us because you let us through. And so many people, including my grandparents, then were fled by just horse and wagon, buggy, with whatever belongings they had over into German displaced persons camps outside of Munich. And they were in, I think, Pershing 1 or Pershing 2. There were two camps there. I'm not sure which one. I think Pershing 1 maybe they were in. Anyway, and so they stayed there for the remainder of the war. And then, of course, Stalin did complain that people who let the Germans through to begin with and sent them out to Siberia a second time. But my grandparents were already in Germany, and they stayed there till for about 4 or 5 years, till after the war. And then they were distributed around the world based on their skills. So my grandfather's family was a merchant family, which is why the communists executed them at the time, and Stalin put them in the gulags as a merchant family. But my grandfather also knew very well horses and farming and so on, because that was just part of life in general, right? Just like even now in Russia, everybody has their little, hundredth of an acre of garden for them to do potatoes and stuff. So anyway, so they applied based on this, process. I think the UN ran it or somebody ran it. Anyway, they applied and got a 2-year workmanship at a place up in Binghamton, New York, a horse farm up in Binghamton, New York. So they came to that area. They were up there for the 2 years, and then they were offered a full-time job to stay there. But my grandfather's friends were in Brooklyn, New York. And so he said no, and he moved the family down to Brooklyn, where most of the immigrants worked at a match factory in Long Island City. So he worked at the match factory, my grandmother as well. Then my grandmother became a housemaid, ironing, cleaning houses and so on. But in that match factory, interesting enough, so was the first generation of aristocracy that fled the revolution was working. And now the second wave of immigrants that fled World War II are working side by side next to former princes and princesses and regular laborers. So anyway, so yes, they came that way.
Yeah. And so did you speak Russian at home?
So I grew up only speaking Russian at home because my grandfather worked. My my mother works. My grandfather then at that point when I was born, they moved from Brooklyn into Jamaica, Queens.
Uh-huh.
Um, and my grandfather was a janitor with Kinney Cleaning Company, where he would go in late afternoons and clean office buildings till late at night, come home at 1 in the morning. And my mother was a good stenographer and typist, and so she worked for a company called Crane and Co. on Park Avenue and 48th Street or 50th Street or so. And that company, she was for the CFO, the secretary typist for financial statements and stenography for the CFO. And that's what she did. So she was working. My grandfather was working. So my grandmother was really who brought us up. And all my value set is based on grandmother's wisdom. And she was a kind, wise woman. And so we only spoke Russian at home. She spoke Ukrainian and a bit of Polish with my grandfather. Sometimes, I guess, when they didn't want us to know something, but the language is too close. So sometimes they switched to a little Polish, I guess they knew.
Right.
But by and large, it was Russian at home. And then I have an older brother, 1 year older, George, and a younger brother, Vitaly, 1 year younger. So there's 3 of us, a year apart. And my parents were divorced when we were like 2 or 3 years old. So I didn't really know my father. And so we were with my grandmother.
Yeah.
And then George went to kindergarten and he started to bring some English words home. So we started to earn a little bit of English. My grandparents sent us to the Russian school on Saturdays. I think we were 4 or 5 when we started that school. It was a church school where you learned the Russian language, grammar, literature, geography, history, and religion. And so we did that. I did that probably for 10, 11 years. I think I was like 15, 16 when I graduated from there.
Wow.
We did it every Saturday. So we used to kind of complain. Kids are playing baseball and we're going off to Russian school.
Right.
And Sunday was church. So both Saturday and Sunday mornings, from 7 o'clock till 1 o'clock, we're all taken up. So we just had Saturday and Sunday afternoons to have fun. But it was good. I mean, my grandmother used to say, cry all you want, but you're going to really appreciate knowing the language. And of course, going to Russia in the age of my 20s, heck yeah, I appreciated it. Otherwise, I would not have done and had the success I did have.
Absolutely.
If it wasn't for that and her value set. We learned a lot being home with her. My brother George, even though he knew no English and neither did I, but he became the spelling bee champion in 6th grade. So within 6 years, he was the #1 spelling bee champion. He was valedictorian of our school. He was valedictorian of our junior high school. He went to Stuyvesant High School for gifted kids, was valedictorian there.
Wow.
So, he did pretty well. So, and then for us to fall in his footsteps kind of opened the road because everyone thought we were as smart as him. Not exactly, but that's what they thought. So gave us a lot of credibility anyway.
Yeah.
So that was fine.
And then as you were growing up, I mean, obviously the Soviet Union was closed. You weren't thinking about having a career related to this heritage while you were you
No, not a career at that time. I mean, when my brother graduated valedictorian in 6th grade, my mother said, I want to reward you with such hard work and take you and like on an international trip, kind of a reward, 6th grade reward. Because I mean, he got so many medals and accolades and stuff. So she took him to London and Paris. And Rome, I think it was London, Paris, and Rome. I think she wanted to see the world too. They saved up a bunch of money. It wasn't easy to do, but they did it.
Yeah.
And in 1968, her best friend's mother worked as an interpreter at the UN. And in 1968, she was able to take her daughter and my mother on a trip to the Soviet Union.
Wow.
As part of the UN.
Yeah.
And at that time, my mother tried and was able to find some of my grandparents' relatives still in different cities. One in the southern part of Ukraine, one in Minsk, another one in Siberia. So anyway, they were able to kind of locate them.
Yeah.
But when I graduated next year later, and I got some pretty good awards too, but not valedictorian as my brother. But so my mother said, okay, let's make it a little tradition. Where do you want to go? And I said, well, I don't know. Where do you want to go? She said, I'd like to go back to Russia. I said, okay. So I went with her. She took me on that trip in 1972. So I went to the Soviet Union to meet relatives in Moscow. Then we went to Kiev to meet relatives. Then we decided to have our own little couple of days in Yalta and Sochi as kind of a, vacation thing,
Right.
just to see the place. And then we went up to St. Petersburg. And so we met several relative family there. My grandmother's brother in Minsk, my grandmother's other brother in Kharkov. And they connected with other relatives. So we got addresses, phone numbers, and things like that. So I was there. I saw the Soviet Union. I saw the everybody following us everywhere we went, and all the army guns and all that baloney stuff there.
Right.
Then in 1981, I at NYU took a semester off and became the tour manager for a rock group. And that rock group are in the Detroit Wheels. So when I joined NYU freshman year, you have to choose some committees you want to volunteer at. So I thought, what am I really interested in? I wasn't really joining the finance club and accounting club right away. So I joined the concert club, and we brought in several bands. We brought B-52's first ever to New York concert, the Go-Go's, the Go-Go's. We brought first ever. Then they played the Palladium and Garden and all that. But we found them and we brought them up there. And we also brought James Brown back and Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels back. Those were kind of older, known names, but we thought, they were restarting, rekindling. And so we brought them in. And I became friends with the Mitch Ryder's manager. And he said, hey, you jokingly say, join the Navy, see the world, but really join a rock band, you'll see the world. Why don't you take a semester off and help me run this tour? We're going to do a US European tour. Okay. So I did it, took a semester off, did this US tour and the European tour. And when we were in Germany, Mitch Ryder said, hey, something Russian language? Let's jump on a plane and go to Moscow. I want to see the place. And I was like, are you kidding? What are you going to do? He goes, I'm just going to go to Red Square and belt out Good Golly Miss Molly right there with just my voice. And I said, right, and get us all arrested doing it. So I kind of reopened thinking about Russia a little bit at that time, Soviet Union. And we didn't do that. I didn't want to get him get arrested or get arrested. So we didn't. We just finished the European tour. And then I'm graduating now. And as I'm graduating, I'm thinking, okay, I have the career counselor who was amazing and getting us in all these interviews, but who's going to help me understand all my job choices? And I actually was fortunate to get numerous job opportunities, but there wasn't really anybody to go to. So I'll go to my mother, and my mother's like, well, we don't talk business in the Russian community. We'll talk literature, we'll talk history, we'll talk art, we'll talk ballet, we'll talk opera, maybe medicine, maybe math, chemistry, physics, but that's about it. So I thought, okay, we have a void here, and that's called networking.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned it to a couple of friends, and they said, that's life. So I graduate, I took a job on Wall Street on my own, but it annoyed me that was the case. So I saw another fellow on Wall Street, a Russian fellow, this guy, Mickey Golitsyn, he was working bank in New York, Prince Golitsyn. I said, how did you choose this? He goes, it was by luck. I had a friend that was working here. A neighbor said, why don't you come work here? I said, yeah, but when I was there, I didn't even know you existed. I didn't even know you worked at the bank. I knew you in church as, an altar guy, but I had no idea you were a banker. I could have asked you some questions that maybe helped me figure something out. And he's like, you're right. We don't have that. And I said, why don't we? He goes, okay. And this other guy, Nikita Nazarov, who was a real kind of instigator kid, a really good guy. And he said, okay, the two of you, why don't we start something? So I started and founded called the Russian American Professional Club. And the three of us were the first ones to kind of start it. I wrote the charter for it, which I took out of my NYU finance club charters and stuff. And because I was on the finance committee later in my junior and senior year at NYU, I was on the finance committee, the accounting committee, Beta Alpha, Psi, and all those. Anyway, so I took that, I wrote the charter, got an emblem. Tanya Flynn helped create a really cool emblem, Russian traditional looking emblem. And we created the Russian American Professional Club. And this club, we started to invite people, any profession, ballerina, literature writer, doctor, dentist, professional athlete. I didn't care. You would just call yourself a professional. You're part of the club. We need to bring networking together. And we started to do dinners, quarterly dinners. And I got the Whitehall Club down in New York to really give us a great price. And I invited some people that I knew. So one of our first speaker was Paul Volcker. He was Fed chair. So, he came in and he's like, okay, I can explain to you the importance of networking, the importance of finance and things. I had George Gould, Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, come in. Turns out one of our members' dad was an inventor in the military that invented the stealth technology and invented, some of the rockets, some of the most advanced US military rockets, and how he went out on these test runs, even using his car, sticking things out the window with his hand to see how dynamics worked and stuff. And we didn't even know that. We didn't even know because nobody talked about these things. Right. So we invited them to these dinners, and our club got to about 700 people.
700?
700. Yeah. Toronto, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Atlanta, San Francisco was a big group out in San Francisco, Chicago. So we had like 7 cities. And so we would do these quarterly meetings, and then each city started to do their quarterly meetings. Right. And we then put together a brochure of our quarterly meeting, and we would then send it to the other city so that they would share it. And it became this kind of thing. So through that process, I was also I was an assistant to a professor at NYU in real estate finance. And that professor in real estate finance, who was my professor when I was at NYU, an undergraduate, I wanted to be a investment banker. I wanted to be a doctor of capital structure. To me, accounting is the language of business. So you need to understand the language of business, language of finance, it's accounting. I didn't want to be an accountant, but I wanted to speak the language. So I had an accounting degree and I had some auditing original background because I wanted to learn through audit how everything needs to be done correctly. Because auditing is when you review people, whether they did it to the right standards or the best standards. So why not learn the standards that are best by being an auditor first and then going off and doing it? So I was accounting, the language of business, language of finance, auditing to know how it should be done right already, and then moving on to doing it. So finance was my second major, and international finance, because money's fungible. So I triple majored at NYU, and pretty much did my first year MBA. And they said, you're going to finish up your last 2 semesters. And I said, no, I'm going to go see the real world, and then I'll come back to decide which concentration my last 2 semesters I want, whether it's markets and trading, whether it's investment banking, whether it's real estate finance, what do I really want to do in life? So I never came back in the end because I went to Russia and never came back. But in learning finance, I was having a hard time with the concept of widgets. It turns out I'm a dyslexic. I didn't realize that till many years later. But widgets to me was not tangible. And my roommate at the time said, Peter, you're going to fail out of what you want to do in life. You need to move into the real estate finance class, because when we go to dinners a couple of times, you tell me your grandfather, to help survive, bought a house down the block and rents it. And that's what real estate finance is. You're tangible. You need to touch it, feel it. You know what a house is. You know what a rent is. You know what electric expense is. You got to move your finance education quickly into the real estate class. Otherwise, you're going to fail out in your widgets because nothing makes sense to you. And wow. He was right. Yeah. And the dean allowed me to do that. And so I was so thankful to my roommate and this professor that I said to this professor, I'll help you out, because I ended up getting an A+. I got perfect grades in the class. Everything came together. And he said, great, Peter, why don't you become my assistant? We teach the Harvard case study course, which is what I took. And why don't you be the grunt helping the assistant professor with students that need additional focus on the case studies, and then I'll teach the theory, you teach the actual case examples, and that's how we'll work. So I did it for a few years as I'm working on Wall Street to keep up my credit skills, and in a way to thank him for doing it. Plus NYU graduate program was down on Trinity Place, which is a few blocks from where I worked anyway. So I did that. That professor was friends with a Washington lobbyist who was also the lobbyist for Ted Turner. And he was friends with this lobbyist, and he wanted to become, actually, this professor wanted to become Secretary of Education in the 80s under George H.W. Bush. So he became not only friends with him, but was kind of getting him to help him potentially, meet the right people for that kind of consideration.
Right.
So that lobbyist said to him, Ted Turner is opening up CNN in Moscow, and he's trying to do this program there with CNN. And he has a friend in Chicago by the name of Joe Ritchie, who wants to go over and create the first Soviet-American joint venture or do something to help create a bridge between these two nuclear powers. He's got 13 kids. He doesn't want the world to come to an end in a nuclear catastrophe. So he's going over there to do it. And anyway, they had this discussion. So Joe ends up going there, uses Ted Turner's apartment and his interpreters. And so this lobbyist.
And what year was this?
Probably 1987, 88.
Okay, and this is also when these space bridges and exchanges are going on. So there's a kind of a general movement.
Apollo, all that stuff is happening. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And Perestroika is going, Glasnost is going, and all that. And so this lobbyist tells Paul Pilzer, my professor, that this is what actually did happen. Remember I was telling you about this guy, he was doing all these things. Well, now he actually did it. He went over there, he started this thing, but now he needs help to figure out how to really move forward. He met these people, shook hands, started a first joint venture, but now he's got to, he doesn't have anyone to really do this. So Paul said, hey, listen, my assistant professor here, Peter, my former student, is helping me. He's actually president of the Russian American Professional Club. I spoke at his club with quite a number of people in New York alone that were there, about 75 people in New York, but his network is pretty big around the country. And he speaks Russian himself and understands business finance. Pretty nice, smart guy. Plus, he was just last year in Moscow and St. Petersburg with Billy Joel as the Russian tour manager for Billy Joel's tour. Because during the concert time when I was at NYU, part of my financial aid, I had to have a job. So I actually decided to double up on concerts, and I worked for Ron Delsner, who was the concert promoter in New York. So I figured the concert committee, the concert promoter, I might as well get better contacts to, bridge both of those pastimes or work efforts. So part of my financial aid program is I had to work. So I got this job and I did numerous concerts with Billy Joel. His manager knew, that I spoke Russian to, and called up and said, would you be our interpreter, Russian, tour manager? And the real
can I interrupt you? Do you know then Peter Gregori and Jim Hickman, who were allegedly also involved with this Billy Joel?
They were the official people from the U.S. government State Department program. They were the people that organized it, and HBO supported it, funded it. But they were the ones that were the official government, the people that did it. Yes.
Yeah. And then you were working with Billy Joel directly.
Billy Joel. I was on Billy Joel's team. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did that. They had this guy, Igor Smirnov, who was the Russian interpreter for Billy on the stage. And I was kind of the assistant tour manager under Jimmy Miner, who was the world tour manager. That helped him. I interpreted things for him. I did errands for him. I went with Billy Joel into the audience. When Billy jumps into the audience and he runs around, I go with Billy because I speak the language too. If anyone, to say something. So yeah, if you see the HBO, you'll see me in a crazy green with yellow striped shirt out there. Anyway, so he tells this to, he basically tells, and most people knew that I was Russian because my grandmother would call backstage at the Palladium Theater for something, rarely, but she would call, and Mike Proscia, the head of the union, would say, hey, get that Russian kid. I was the backstage director at the Palladium Theater. There was two people running it, the stage manager and the backstage director, the two of us. And he was like, get that Russian kid. Anyway, so everyone knew I spoke Russian. And I interpreted actually Elton John's USSA tour for the stage manager, all the equipment set up, all the stage set up for him even before Billy's tour. That was, I think, 86, early 87. This was summer of 87 with Billy Joel.
Wow.
So with that, they kind of said, okay, he did the Elton John's, couple of little things here. I didn't go there, but I helped him do all the paperwork. And then Billy's people asked me, and Jim Hicks, actually, that you mentioned, even called to interview me and said, okay, look, yes, let's do this. Because he had to kind of approve the composition of the Billy's team.
Right.
And since I wasn't the permanent person on the team, I was kind of a little bit in between. He called me up and said, let's meet for coffee. And so anyway, yeah. So yes, all that went through. And anyway, so Paul Pilzer said to his consultant in Washington, you should really consider Peter Derby. And Joe Ritchie called, and I did meet him. And he said, look, I don't know about your 700 other people, but all I know is I've spent with you the day. And before you leave in a few hours on your flight back, because I took like a 6 a.m. flight to Chicago. This was maybe 3 in the afternoon. He goes, you met already with 4 of my most important partners. And they all feel you have the personality and the knowledge and the language. We just want you to go, not somebody that you're going to help identify in your team. Right. Would you do it? So I said, well, the good news is I met my investment banking budget already in the first half of the year. So probably my boss won't give me a hard time on Wall Street, but I have to ask. So came back. It was, time to talk. I sat down and he said, sure, you can do it. Last year you went with Billy Joel. This year you're going for what, Ben and Jerry's now? I said, well, not exactly Ben and Jerry's because they were in the paper with ice cream, but doing, the first technology joint venture. So that's how I did it. I went there.
What kind of business was Joe Ritchie in?
He was in charge of Chicago Research and Trade. There were only 3 option trading companies that were amazing. O'Connor was one of them, Susquehanna the other, and CRT. And this guy could multiply 5 numbers times 5 numbers in his head. I mean, he was, I don't know if he was autistic or whatever, but he was a genius in his own way. I don't know what it means to be able to do that, but he was quite, and he would like take 5-minute naps in the middle of the day. Like literally you come in, he's just like, boom, sleep, wakes up, boom. But he was an interesting fellow, 13 kids, was his parents, I think, were missionaries in Afghanistan at some point. And he spent some time there. So he was kind of a worldly thinking guy.
Yeah.
He was pretty close to Richard Branson and Steve Fawcett because they all flew planes and they did that balloon thing where they tried to go around the world, the 3 of them in a balloon. And so I think he did the mission control for that balloon trip. Anyway, he was a very unique person who was extremely soulful and extremely like no ego, like literally almost no ego, like a human being with no ego, purely brains, So his mind was not ego, his mind was calculative, and his entire being was his heart, how his soul felt. Like when you talked to him, it was almost like you were embraced in this cloud of goodwill. You know what I mean? It was kind of an interesting thing, which somewhat made me, when I closed my eyes, felt like it was my grandmother's value set. It was like this real wholesomeness to what he was trying to do. So anyway, I went over there and literally like Bill Gates coming, sleeping on the couch that I was on, and this person, because Bill Gates was doing work there with the same group because it's the first technology joint venture. And
the Russian partner was who?
Oh, the Russian partner was a compilation. So it turns out that when Joe Ritchie tried to explain his businesses to them when he went over to try to just do something, anything to help and create this bridge and create a dialogue, he tried to say it's finance, but it was algorithms and computer driven. So the only thing the Soviets understood was it was computers and algorithms. They don't understand the other side.
Right.
And so they got him to meet with Moscow University, KAMAZ, which is the General Motors of Russia, KAMAZ.
Yeah, I know KAMAZ. Yeah.
And the Ministry of Aerospace, because he was a pilot, all of that. And so in the end, the vice director of KAMAZ in charge of computer technology, Peter Zrelov, was kind of the one that said, wow, we can really do something here because we at Kamaz, we need computers. We can't. They're all sanctions and COCOM against us and everything else. So maybe we can do something where we create software there. We can get computers back and they could do something. So he became kind of like the lead Soviet guy out of this concoction of ministries to do things. And so they kind of shook hands, and the both of them liked each other, and they both became kind of like these two co-CEOs of this new project. And Joe Ritchie said, okay, Peter, you're the CEO, the general director, because at that time there was no CEO concept. You're the general director, you figure it out. So Piotr Zrelov, he went and said, okay, I'm in Kamaz. So Kamaz could do it, but I need the ministry. So I get the automobile ministry to be my partner.
Right.
Moscow University, you were here at the meeting, so why don't you jump in? The NASA equivalent, Aerospace Institute, you jump in. To me, the mathematical economics business, this is as close as business we can understand in this, you jump in. And these are all academics, Makarov and Sadovniky. So you get kind of like this elite group, and it's all funded by Kamaz. So Kamaz became the beneficiary of technology and the funder of this thing from the Russian side, with all these ministries are a part of it. So like the first time I went there, you meet with 7 different ministers. They have no idea probably what's going on originally. Anyway, I went over there and I realized it was heavy technology, software, hardware, but my brother worked at Bell Labs and he was on the team that created the Unix operating system, the one that was valedictorian everywhere.
Yeah.
And he was a Cornell electric engineer. Anyway, so I had him come over for a few weeks to Moscow to help me figure out the business plan, because they have this whole business plan. So he really is the one that drove and the original pieces of that business plan, which, by the way, the Russians did a pretty good job on, and he helped them with, and to lay out that. So that was
that was already there was a formal joint venture. It was registered.
Just created, registered in 87. I think it was registered in 87. This was summer of 88. When now, Joe Ritchie sent his $5 million in starting capital. Now they needed to figure out how they were going to spend it, how were they going to actually make money. So I came in there to look at their business plans. And then I realized I need somebody else to help me. So I got my brother fly over, who really understood a lot of this and gave our input. But the Russians really drove it, and Joe Ritchie's team approved it. But we gave our strong input. And we became friends with all of them. And they said, why don't you stay and work? And I said, no, I'm into banking, investment banking, stock exchanges. So I left.
Yeah. And this, by the way, this was Dialog, was the name of it?
Yes. So the official first joint venture was an American guy from New Jersey who wanted to bring a pizza truck and just have those outdoor trailers in New York City that have Mexican food and this fried food, the trucks, the food trucks. Yeah. So he created a pizza food truck, and he also wanted there to be love between America and the United States. So he painted he painted the Soviet American flag on the side of this pizza truck, shipped over this trailer through Finland, brought it into Moscow, and decided he was just going to, pull up on a street corner in some parking lot off a red square and sell pizza with an American flag and a Soviet flag, love kind of thing. But he needed an official partner. So he kind of connected with Joe Ritchie. And so the same person, Pyotr Zrelov, helped to start that little pizza truck venture. That was the official first joint venture, but the real joint venture was Dialog.
I see.
And it was already formed, and the charter was in place, and they got their own little office building right next to the cathedral of the Patriarch of Russia, literally right in the grounds of the cathedral. And Joe Ritchie, being kind of a missionary, loved the connection to the church and the soulfulness. And so you would walk out of the cathedral, it was a little yellow subnyak, and that was Dialog. It was literally in the grounds of the gates of the entrance to the cathedral.
Wow.
Dialoghovsky Sobor. Anyway, so they formed this joint venture, as I said, came in. We did this advice to them. They really did a great job. We left. I became friends. I get engaged in February of 89. Wedding is in July. And I decided to invite Pyotr Zrelov, because he was so interested in the Russian history and the White Russians. My wife's family, at that time she was my girlfriend, but he kind of knew that I was dating her and that she, her family used to rule Russia from 1860 to 1605. And so there was some interest. So I decided to invite them, and they came. When they came to my wedding at my reception, and, we got married in the cathedral here. It was a very nice service, and she comes from, as I said, princess background and so on.
Romanov family?
Before, there were rulers before the Romanovs. They were the Vikings, Rurik, that came in 1860.
Wow.
I mean, in 860. The Russians couldn't. The Russians were killing each other basically around St. Petersburg, and they needed somebody to give them the rule.
Right.
So they went to the Vikings, who were the rulers at the time of the Scandinavia and so on, and one of the seventh son, I believe, Rurik, was sent to Novgorod to start this rule. And so his family ruled up through Ivan the Terrible.
Okay.
1605. So they ruled for about almost 800 years.
Right.
And then when Dmitry was killed by Ivan the Terrible, his only son, and then
in Uglitch.
Yes.
I was there, yeah. I've seen
And there was Menin Požarsky kind of tried to help rule. The other person was the head of the army at the time of the Cossacks was Trubetskoy. And so they kind of ruled for these 10 years. But Trubetskoy, being the main ruler of that threesome, had no kids. And so the patriarch said, look, this can't continue. We need to, because fake Dimitris are showing up all the time. We need to now just get a new czar in place. So why don't my brother's son, Mikhail Alexeyevich Romanov, why don't he become the ruler at 14? We'll just guide him. We have elders that'll guide him. He'll be around long enough. So it was the patriarch deciding that his nephew, his brother's son, was going to be the guy that did it. That's the beginning of the Romanov family.
Okay.
So anyway, so they came to our wedding. Our wedding was the old Russian tradition weddings with the crowns and all anyway. And at the reception, Pyotr Zrelov tells me, and I invited, actually, out of the three main people, two of them came. The spouses came too. And Pyotr tells me, listen, Peter, we did a great job. The 5 million turned into 30 million. The sad news is that all of that was hard currency, and it's in Vneshekonom Bank. And the bank now is asking us for a 5-year business plan to have access to our own money. And I said, well, that's not going to fly. You're not going to be a successful joint venture if you can't have access to the money you earn to reinvest and grow the business. And he said, exactly. And you said you weren't going to stay with us because it's technology, but you would if it was banking, investment banking, stock exchanges, so on. So we need a bank. And I said, okay, but there's only 5 state banks. There's no private bank there, I mean, you want to try to do a joint venture or something? He said, well, the only structure we're allowed to have now under Perestroika is a cooperative, because they want restaurants, little cooperative restaurants. They want little services to start. So the only thing we have is a law that just recently passed for a cooperative. So I don't know, I guess you're right. I don't know how to do this. And I said, cooperative? Really? Well, we have something in the US called credit union. Right. And a credit union is a cooperative, but it's a banking cooperative. And he said, really? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, you know what? Let me go back. Let me try. Maybe we can set up a cooperative bank and see if that goes anywhere. And I said, okay. Just 1 sec. And I said, okay, let me know what happens. But it's literally my wedding reception. I just got married. What you're thinking is, if we start a bank, when am I going to tell my wife we just got married, we're moving to Moscow.
Right.
And so just give me a little time here.
Yeah.
And he called, this was July 16th. So he called me at the end of August, beginning of September, and said, I think we can do it. I think we can form a cooperative credit union bank. Can you get rules on how that works and everything from the US so we could try to set this up? And I said, okay. And so that's how it started. He registered it. He officially started in September, but he got registered by the central bank on the 19th of November of 89.
89. Yeah.
89 as the first non-state bank.
Wow.
And but as a cooperative, no one even thought of that, I guess. And he tried it, he did it, and he used Dialog's capital to start it, the JV. So the JV owned the bank. He tried to do it under the cooperative of Moscow University, TSMI, the shareholders of Dialog that were economically driven. So Moscow University, they have finance department. TSMI, which is the Central Mathematic and Economic Institute, has an economics, concentration, and JV Dialog. So those were the three original founders of DialogBank.
And they were able to get the funds out of Combank?
No, not yet, but that was the intention.
Okay.
So they said, we'll do this charter capital, but now we have to get Combank to transfer money over, of which they first did in rubles, by the way. They convert everything in rubles at exchange rate of 1-to-1, if you can believe it. Anyway, to start it. So the people at the central bank said, wow, this is an interesting thing. And they got somebody from the central bank to leave the central bank to join us in helping to start it. So then I came over as the CFO of it. I agreed to come. And so that was, they registered in November. I agreed in late February, well, actually late January, early February to do it. I was trying to see how everything would work out here, get my wife on board. And then after I agreed to do it, I started to tell my family about it, which was not easy because going back to the Soviet Union, the communists executed my grandparents' parents, and it was just not a good situation. My grandfather was against it. He basically said the communists are just going to eat you up and spit you out. This is not, you're not going to make a difference. Nothing's going to change. They're going to make you do things if you do try to make a difference in a bad way. So I kept telling him, I'm going to be true to the cause. I'm going to be, honorable, my grandmother's values, all of that. Anyway, through all of that, he had a stroke and he died.
Ooh.
So that made it somewhat burdensome on me, but also made it a strong conviction of I'm either doing it the right way or I'm walking away. And I was hugely passionate about protecting grandmothers and grandfathers. So when I was on the team writing legislation, they kept telling me, why is it always you're giving examples of your grandmother or grandfather? Why they nicknamed me the protector of grandparents in the Ministry of Finance, because I would always say, how would, Babushka Anya look at this? And they're like, what? Anyway, so that was the case. And then Yeltsin was speaking at Columbia University in also around May or so, June of 1990. I went down there to his speech. I became friends actually with a fellow who was at the UN, a Russian fellow at the UN, and because of the concerts, he was doing the cultural things for the UN thing. And he said, listen, Yeltsin's coming. You're going to go to Russia. You should come and say hello, and he should know you going there. So I met Yeltsin. Yeltsin gave me his home number. And one of his assistants, Yaroshenko, said, look, I'm in charge of finance and taxation. Can you bring me a lot of books and things for that? And can you get a big Russian flag, since Russian? And because we had a conversation, I was in Russian Boy Scouts. It was called, Scouta and stuff. So I knew that. So I brought him a whole box of U.S. tax law, the codes, and business law books, and that I had from NYU. And I got him a huge Russian red, white, and blue flag. Bielystiny Krasny. It was white, blue, red. The old is up before the revolution flag. Okay. And a big one, which at the end, when the whole place fell, that's the flag I think they used to put on top of the White House. Wow. When in 1993. Anyway, it was a big flag. He had it in his office in the White House, in the Russian White House. Anyway, so I arrived now, and I know a bit Yaroshenko. He's asked to connect with him. We started the bank. Yaroshenko jokingly said, look, come after July 2nd, otherwise you're going to end up having to pay taxes. You'll be there 183 days. So why don't you come? I mean, you're coming June 30th. Wait 2 more days, and then you don't have to file your first year. Here, you'll get to know the tax code and abide by things. So I came July 2nd at his advice and started DialogBank with the team there. We were 4 or 5 people at the time.
And the team were Russians that came
all
from
Russians, couple from the former, from the Russian central bank workers. Our little townhouse was attached to the back of the Ministry of Finance of the Soviet Union. So we were right on Red Square, right off of Red Square.
Wow.
And I remember having one of the foreign American partners coming in later, clients, and he said, well, how do I know you'll have enough money to always transfer? And I said, well, I think I'm attached to the Ministry of Finance here, jokingly,
Yeah.
He's like, really? That's the building? And I said, yeah, that's the building right attached to my, break into the wall and say hello to the minister. Anyway, so I came in, we started that, and then the chairman of the board, Makarov, who was head of the TSEMI, which is the Economics and Mathematical Institute, he basically said, look, I spoke to someone at the central bank. They really need help for us to work as an independent bank because they don't really have rules. So you need to go meet with them and see how we can try to write, it's called the Reglement, which is basically policies and procedures. How are they going to apply to creating now a non-state bank? So I did. I went to the ministry. I went to the central bank, and I met with Dmitry Tulin and Viktor Gerashiko, the chairman. And they were very nice. They were very welcoming. They spoke English beautifully. And they basically said, look, you're here. This is new. This is interesting. Not sure we want you. Not sure we want this, but let's give it a shot. We need to have rules and procedures for you to follow. As an independent bank, you cannot disgrace the Soviet Union's image in finance in the world markets because we have a very good reputation in banking. And they also owned a lot of these European, like Moscow Narodny Bank in London. They had like a whole chain of subsidiary banks in Austria and other places.
Remember that. Yeah.
That was central bankers. So you can't blemish us. So we're going to write these rules. And then we'll have you look at them and read them. And we have this guy, he was murdered later, a nice young kid, Andrei, oh my
Paul
gosh.
Tatum?
I'm sorry? No, Paul Tatum was an American that got murdered, but the Russian guy that got murdered on the soccer field, he was the vice chairman of the Central Bank of Russia later. Kozlov, Andrei Kozlov, I believe his name is Andrei Kozlov. He's going to be writing all the rules. So why don't you connect with him? So I connect with him after the meeting, connect with him. And he's like, okay, I got to write these rules. Can you help me write them? But I'll write them. But you'll write them, but I'll write them. We'll together write them, but it'll be my rules. I said, okay. So that's how we started.
Yeah.
So he was writing the rules. I was helping him write the rules for the banking side to do the private banks. Then through that process, I met Boris Fyodorov, who wanted to know what the hell's going on. So I went to the Ministry of Finance, explained to him. And then he said, okay, I have Serozha Zvier, I have Bella Ilyinishna Zlatkis, the deputy chair of department head for financial markets here. And I want her to write some rules. So why don't you work with her to write some rules for us too in the financial side? And that was basically, we wrote the corporate law, which is the Akционерное общество law, which I told you last time about how we wrote it. And December 10th, it ended up the one name switched, one shareholder, one vote, one share, one vote, that little nuance.
Yeah.
And then Yeltsin wanted it December 25th to say it's kind of a Western law. So I started working with Zlatkis as well. And then at that moment, there was a program called the 500-Day Plan that was being done under Gorbachev. But right when Gorbachev couldn't make up his mind, yes or no, he was a little half pregnant, which in nature never really works.
Right.
The team left to go to Yeltsin. And just as they got to Yeltsin, Zlatkis was working with them and said, we should meet with them. So I met Yavlinsky, and he had his assistant, Serozha Zverev. And he said, let's work together too. So I ended up working with Sergei Zverev in the White House under Yavlinsky. I worked with Bela Linishna Zlatkis at the Ministry of Finance of Russia under Fyodorov. And I was working with Andrei Kozlov under Dmitry Tulin in the central bank. And those were the worker bees. Those are the people that truly created, those three people truly created the basic infrastructure on the government side for a new economy and a new market reform. They were the first key seeds in that process. People jumped on board to help out, whether it was Cleary Gottlieb's helping us write the corporate law later, and a few people, one person from Moscow University, Ivan Igor, something, he had longer hair, really good guy. He was a professor in Moscow University. He helped with stuff, finding the original law of stock exchanges from the chairman of the central bank telling us to go to his father, who's in the library, but don't tell anybody the books weren't all burned. That was, I mean, there was interesting little nuances at that time.
Yeah.
But it was their initiative, to do this. And we were just helping it along in ways. Right. One of the other really important help came from Jerry Corrigan. He was the president of the New York Fed. He came over also for this kind of helping thing because Yeltsin said, I really want to get domestic capital markets, and they usually have to start with the domestic treasury market. So if I can't get Russian bonds bought by the people, they're not going to buy any corporate bonds. So we need to do something. Jerry Corrigan came over. They drank a lot of vodka, hugged each other, bear hugged each other. And then Jerry Corrigan came back and said to the bankers in New York, I need some of you 30-year-olds, 32-year-olds that really do all the work to volunteer and go over there, part of USAID or some kind of reform. I don't know exactly which committee of government it was. Maybe it was the Federal Reserve's education program. I need you guys to go over there. So 3 of them came over to meet with Andrei Kozlov. I met them too. And I said to them, look, you cannot come off as you telling them what to do. You have to come off and say, I'm here. Tell me what you want to know. It's going to be your law. It's going to be your market. It's going to be your treasury. We're not telling you what to do. There's a lot of different ways to make this painting work, but it's going to be your painting, and we'll just give you the data. We'll give you the colors. We'll give you the tools to figure it out. And the reason is because I met with Kozlov a few days before they were coming, and he's like, these guys are going to come. They're going to tell me I'm an idiot. I know nothing. Here's what you do. They're going to drop the procedures on my table and say, translate them into Russian, goodbye.
Yeah.
So to make sure that didn't happen, which is why the uniqueness is to have a conduit of a goodwill person. I'm not going to, try to say more than what I was or am, but being in the right place at the right time, having the right relationship of respect and humanity between like Kozlov and I, him sharing his concerns with me, my opportunity to see this team before they come in, giving them a little bit of guidance. They didn't have to listen to me either,
right?
But giving them a little bit of guidance in this. And by the way, they naturally right away said, of course. Matter of fact, Peter, without you even telling us, that's probably what we would have done. But now that you tell us, we definitely will do that. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I felt that they were really on that track anyway. I wasn't trying to convince them of it. They immediately kind of accepted it. And of course, the meeting happened. I'm sitting there with Kozlov, and Kozlov is saying, okay, so tell me what I'm supposed to do. And they're like, no, you tell me what you want. And he's like, yeah, okay, yeah. Just tell me what you brought, put it on the table, give it to me. And they're like, no, that's not what we're here. If that's the way it is, we're leaving. And they said, you're what? He goes, yeah, we're going to leave. We're not here to tell you anything. That means you didn't do your homework. You don't want to know what you want to do. We're here to help you to do what you want to do. And he said, are you for real? They said, yes. And they literally, it went that way. And the first GKL markets were created based on that. Jerry Corrigan's bear hug, this team coming in, telling Andrei, we're here to just only inform you and help you in any way we can, but it's going to be your decisions the entire way. And then he was empowered. He brought in 2 of his other people, and the 3 of them and myself from time to time, and with this team, really put together the structure and created the GKO market.
Wow.
So those are the unique help that, and I at that time felt so great that finally this good relationship between Russia and the US, mutual respect, and at that time, 90+% of the population adored America, right? Before the whole Kosovo and Serbia war and all that stuff.
Right.
So, or NATO moving, expanding, all that. Before all that politics, it was amazing. And it was even on policy issues. And they were trying to figure out which way, what's the better version? This way, that way, what goes first, how it works. And I thought it was critical to the foundation of how Russia's beginnings were so solidly done and solidly supported. And the institutions came in to fund it because the Fed people knew what it was done and how it was done. And so people were starting to invest because they kind of knew the system. Anyway, yeah. I think those were key components early on. Yeah. We then formed kind of restructured DialogBank in my second year, going into 1991. So almost, after the second anniversary, where we formed an international bank. DialogBank was the first international bank because I went to apply for an international banking license with SWIFT and do foreign payments. This first was all domestic, and now I can bring the real hard currency back into DialogBank because we couldn't have hard currency until I had a foreign license.
Right.
So that's when I became a part owner of the bank as well as a manager of the bank, and we restructured the equity holding a bit. We put in an ESOP plan for all the employees to do a stock ownership plan, and everyone. And then we got our first license. And as a matter of fact, the central bank then asked me to be kind of an interviewer of other Russian banks who want international banking licenses. So I had to kind of give the okay or not to all these other now oligarchs of Russia of whether or not to have them give banks. So that's how it evolved.
Originally, was your clients for the DialogBank it's like a pocket bank of the joint venture.
Correct. Our first client was Dialog itself.
Yeah.
Some of the workers had spouses that had little co-op restaurants. So we got a couple of little restaurants. We got a guy that was running a taxi service. We got a department of Moscow State University that opened up an account. So we got little things. We had then joint ventures. JV Dialog had joint ventures in about 15 cities. So I opened up branches in 15 Soviet cities. Like Minsk was just a city, Belarusia, but we opened up a branch because it was the Soviet Union, right?
Right.
Soviet Union. And it was so we opened up branches in 15 different cities in 1990. Then the Soviet Union fell apart at the end of 1990, and we started, having to then do individual. We got grandfather licenses in Kazakhstan and in Belarusia and so on. So yes, it was a JV Dialog network and suppliers of JV Dialog. And so it became that. Once I got the international license in 91, we went and said, okay, Pizza Hut, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, you're right there.
Right.
Would you do it? And they agreed. Radisson Hotel. Yes. But Radisson said, I'll do it if you open a branch here. I'm like, well, thank you.
In the Radisson.
Yeah, in the Radisson. So I said, okay. And we opened the branch. We licensed the branch. So it was kind of we helped them. They helped us. Pizza Hut tried to
91, you said? 91?
We got the license in 91. So this was late 91, 92 when we opened up all of these accounts. And then I basically went straight down the list of foreign companies. German, Japanese, Korean, you name it, Italian. We started to, because it was either us or Vneshka Bank. You had two choices.
Right.
And as I mentioned to you when I talked to you before, how licenses are done. I go in to get my #1 license done, and I see there's a second bank asking for license #2. And I was like, how did they get here? And it was the husband of the secretary of the chairman of the central banks, who ran another bank, who she must have told her husband. He's like, I need one of them too, right? So most business bank was 2, income bank was #3, licenses and international licenses. And so, but they were more industrial Russian. They were dealing with Russian ministries. And so they weren't really competing with, the Arbat store, that Irish store in the Arbat, that was bringing in food and clothing and things like that. So I was doing import, export, and a lot of the foreign. I mean, I had Coke and Pepsi. I think I was the only bank in the entire world that had Coke and Pepsi in the same institution, because neither one of them will ever allow that. And I had to go to the board meetings, both at Pepsi and Coke, to actually get that approved. And we had to have a Chinese wall, policies and procedures, separate branches where neither branch would, touch either one. So we had one way down southern part of Moscow, Dukat place, Pados, actually, it was called Pados, the place called Pados, an office complex, that was Coke. And Pepsi was at Radisson Slavyanska Hotel. So it was an interesting development. So that's how it started. We did the bank. We already had the investment bank. Troika Dialog started in '91 as well, because of privatization. I was part of the privatization team. I think I told you about that stuff from last time on the big picture strategy stuff. So that's kind of how we developed the bank. And then as we move forward, I wanted Russian citizens, as I mentioned to you last time, to feel fully fledged normal citizens of the world. They don't have to have 20,000 in cash to travel to London. So we decided to create credit cards, bring ATMs, bring mortgages, bring normal consumer life issues. Through that, we did other things. Like I mentioned, you had to choose what kind of credit card you wanted because the election's coming. So people needed to make choices in life and things like that.
Right.
So, but DialogBank itself, we started to enhance our locations closer to where the businesses are, bring the branches to them, because believe it or not, the person from your bank it's like picking up the mail, going to your mailbox. So literally they would come in the morning around 9:30, line up and get all of their last night's payments that money received, as well as to make their payments for today, their wires for today. So it was like this physical trip to your bank every single day to get your statements. That's how you did business. And so we brought the branches closer to their locations, so they don't have to travel all the way through Moscow. We connected computer systems to do it. And then we had some pretty large oil companies out in Siberia. So I needed to figure that out. So I went back to the vice president of Bank of New York. And I said, look, you run correspondent banking. You've been so helpful and everything. I trade and make payments through you before SWIFT. Why can't I use your technology to go to Siberia? And he said, well, you can. So we ended up using the consumer banking software that I had with Citibank, Peter Derby's personal computer software to make Peter Derby's personal transfers at Citibank. I used for the first transfers from Siberia in Russia. And then we used Bank of New York's technology concepts. We did an X.25 network connection and wrote the software based on that to actually have the Siberian oil companies make transfers. I basically put a branch out there connected by computers. And that's how we set up the first thing. It was really using, like some people say, use your American Express, consumer credit card to start your little business in your garage.
Yeah.
Well, I actually used Citibank's consumer transfer system for Peter Derby personally to really start the first transfers out of Russia, to do that way. Anyway, so we did that. We connected Siberia. We started to really give normal banking services within the country and provided citizens with normal banking products for them to feel normal when they traveled anywhere abroad, and introduced, the fundamental.
And is this, as the only one doing this, I mean, I imagine you were somewhat deluged with people. You didn't have to create demand, or did you? We
did not have to create demand. We did have to educate. So we created our own color scheme that was inviting, We use Moscow State University psychology department for this.
Uh-huh.
We came up with a color scheme and a new font scheme, our own fonts that had no edges. And we used the concept of visualization. So like a telephone,
Yeah.
you actually saw a little telephone next to TEL, let's say,
Right.
then the phone number. So you could
Yeah.
either read it, you could either see it, read it, and you know what I mean? We use different mnemonics and things like that to educate, to give people the knowledge. But demand was always there. You just had to, a matter of fact, the demand was so strong that literally DuPont called and said, I understand you're turning down Conoco as a client, but you have to understand they're an important company related to us. And you need to, you know, we have a joint venture where we have to fund it. Why are you turning it down? And I said, well, it wasn't Conoco that we turned down. We simply closed taking any additional clients because we're overwhelmed with clients at Radisson Slavyanskaya. And the lines are getting too long for those morning people coming in to do their payments and getting payments that I don't want the decay of service to discourage my existing clients, right? I mean,
Right.
At some point they don't feel good. And they said, well, we understand that, but can you please add Conoco to us? And of course we did. It was like a $75 million joint venture investment. And, you know, but they were shocked. The CFO of DuPont calling us and going, guys, what are you doing? And we're explaining it's all about service quality. And he's like, okay, I get it.
Right.
I respect that, but can you do me a favor and just add this one client to it? And I said, okay, part of it. So,
And
so the
you
demand was overwhelming.
and you were bringing staff on and having to train them, and
we were training them. We had to bring staff on. There was really no education. We had a psychology department of Moscow University assist because we were getting people like the violinist of the Bolshoi wanting to come in and be a teller because the teller is earning $325 a month, and at the Bolshoi you're getting $150 a month. So, you know, they wanted for the money. So we had to figure out whether we were right brain, left brain. You know, so we didn't want to imprison you in your non-natural skill set,
right.
and you'd be miserable just for the money. So we did a lot of interesting things in that regard too. But we built out the bank, and I kept always saying at the Ministry of Finance, they kept asking me, or the central bank, why when you wrote these rules, you didn't make it exclusive for DialogBank? And I said, listen, I need 500 dialogue banks, not one. To one, service the people, because I can't do it all. And number two, we need a whole community here that can then develop and stand up and not be just the one entity taken out later. So, we just needed a lot of expansion, and I was perfectly okay with it as long as they did it with honesty and integrity.
Yeah.
That was the core pedigree, not always done by others, but that was our pedigree. And it developed, and we were able to bring in a lot of these services and products. And I served on the Antimonopoly Committee. I served on the Capital Markets Committee, on the Finance Committee, on the American Chamber of Commerce. I mean, I bounced between all that to policy just to inform and to steer in the right ways of trying to do this as I saw it from more of a humanistic perspective as well.
Right. So you were doing an awful lot at once there. I mean, but you are a trusted advisor, I assume, and this is why they kept calling on you.
I think they tested it early on in the first legislations I wrote, because one of Yeltsin's senior people said, we looked at this and we found nothing here that was special to you yourself since you wrote this. So please tell us where it is. And I said, I didn't do it. I mean, why would I do it? I want a level playing field. I think I'm good enough to do well. I may not win it, but I know I'll do okay in a level playing field. And they're like, no, where is it? And I said, no, really, this is it. This is the way I am. And I think through that, Yavlinsky was key. Yavlinsky kind of really is the one who ultimately said, this guy has the right intentions. And he's the one that included me in a lot of the things. And after his people tested me, they really, and it was early on, very early on, in October, November, December of 1990. and Yavlinsky was even at dinner at my house when the Soviet Union fell apart that night in Minsk, Russia. I mean Minsk, Belarus. And so there was this. I don't know if it was checking out or what, but there was this level of comfort and sincerity that was mutually felt. And history, right? Because he was there at dinner. He knew my wife. He knew the family. He knew that this was a deeper commitment to the betterment of Russia. And so, yeah, they included me in quite a number of things on the Russian side. And I gave him my true, honest view, or I found good information to do it, right? I mean, I had Paul Volcker meet with them when he was going fishing. And I said, Paul, I've known you for a long time. Did you meet with the chairman? He's like, what am I going to tell him? But it was important. So, they got good, legitimate information. They made choices with it, what they wanted to do or not do. But the initial help was sincere, was quality, was done well, and had real fruits of success, real fruits.
Yeah.
It's what happened later that got destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you expanded the bank, were you bringing in other expats, or were you relying?
So I relied on Russians at the beginning entirely. Then I had a friend who was really a bright lady from our community here in Russia. She went over and married a fellow in Belarus, in Minsk. And I knew her when she worked at Dillon Reed in the bond market. She's a math person, a quantitative person. And so we just started the GKO market, right? And we started the currency exchange market. So we were the founders with the central bank of the ruble dollar exchange market. There was a set of banks, the Russian banks at that time that were licensed. There was about a dozen of us. We were the founding members of the MICEX.
Okay.
And so she came over to Moscow, heard I was there, visited me. And I said, what are you doing? She goes, well, I'm thinking, Russia is progressing and Lukashenko and Belarus is kind of stuck. They're not going anywhere.
Uh-huh.
And my husband, we need to leave Minsk and move to Moscow. I said, okay. She said, can I work for you? I said, sure. Something, you're finance, you're Russian, American. And so she came over to head up our capital markets team, help the trading of ruble dollar currency trading, and then GKO trading. So she came in. So she was great because she was like real Russian, sincere, spoke the language. Her husband was from Belarus, a really nice guy, was in the army, needed to get out. So he decided to go to law school, Moscow University Law School. And he did well, and later on became a lawyer at Troika Dialog later on. And so she came across. So now we had a team of like 12, 15 people, and we're getting more good Russians. I went to Moscow University's president, the rector, and Sadovnichi, and he kept saying, what can I do? What can I do? I'm just on the board. What can I do? And I said, you know what? You have the most important asset any institution has. It's called people. Give me your best students. Give me your best finance students, and so on. So we got some good students. Matter of fact, Ruben Vardanyan was one of their top finance students that then runs Troika Dialog. That's how I got Ruben.
Oh, okay.
Through that. And he was one of their top finance students. So it was people. And then as we started to grow a little bit operationally, I needed a little connection to the West for SWIFT, for MasterCard, Visa. So I had a fellow that I worked with, Louis Schwartz, who was also a very soulful guy, smart, but caring guy. And I said, Louis, I'm doing this stuff in Russia. You're just finishing your MBA program in Chicago. You wanted to have some international experience. Do you feel like coming to Russia? I mean, I'm happy to take you, or you got, you want to go to McKinsey or Morgan Stanley? He's like, no, I'll come. So he came over and he created in the trailers. We had, the offices, we actually had to put office trailers were set up by a US Russian joint venture. And we took 2 trailers. Actually, we first took half a trailer and had the Spaniard oil company have the other half the trailer. Then we expanded, took the whole trailer. And that was our back office for SWIFT transfers. So he headed up. I would go there. He had a jar of candy. Anybody that did not say a bad word, a curse, or did something good would get a candy. Anybody that cursed had to put a ruble into another jar. And he had like a team T-shirts. He was a Boston Red Sox fan and basketball guy. So he had like hats and T-shirts. And I was like, oh my God, there's like this whole culture of, all for one, one for all.
Yeah.
He did a great job. I mean, SWIFT payments were done way ahead of time. I mean, they were amazing. Almost zero error rate at the time. I mean, it was amazing. And so he was wonderful.
Yeah.
So now we have the first two Americans, and everybody there is like, this is the best thing ever because they're knowledgeable. They treat us with respect. They include us. They're wonderful. Everything was great. Then as we started to try to get additional Americans, that maybe we went a little too fast. Maybe we didn't, it's like you're supposed to, as they say in Silicon Valley, hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah.
As we brought some of the additional Americans, not all of them had that level of wonderfulness to them. And they were a little bit more short on patience. They were a little bit more me. And things at times unraveled with those. So, and in general, it's almost simultaneous with Russia as a country starting to question America's true intent with movement of NATO and the whole Kosovo crisis and everything else. And
right.
And the Russians were like, okay, Louis and Sonia are amazing, Peter, but who the hell is this guy? Yeah. He's rude, he's demanding, he's condescending, he's drunk all the time. I don't know. It was like a whole bunch of things. He wants bonuses, but not for us. And I don't know. It was just not all of them worked out. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And now your focus was on the bank more than on Troika Dialog.
My focus was on both. However, the bank was 95% of the assets, revenues, expenses, and everything. The investment bank was just building up, was just getting going. We just got a contract to represent Merrill Lynch that gave us enough money to pay everybody's salary, enough to send people to Merrill Lynch's training programs. So it kind of got us going, but there wasn't yet an industry, right? We were just starting privatization. And as the voucher program got going, that was the first thing was, we did the first red herring for NIPEC oil company, and we sold it at a table out on Manezhny Ploshchad, set up a desk for people to sign up for shares,
Wow.
So, and with a real red herring, like it was called the red herring in Russian, because, we have before an IPO, you used to have this thing called the red herring in America. It was a document, a prospectus that was the informational prospectus. So we followed American basic standards at the time. So they were just getting going. And the team was a really great team. Katya Kubasova and Ruben Vardanyan ran it. Katya Kubasova's dad was a Soyuz Apollo astronaut that actually was the head commander of that mission, Apollo mission, Soyuz Apollo mission on the Russian side. Anyway, so they ran it and they were doing it out of an apartment. I would meet with them, but yes, I think they were a little orphaned because they probably needed, 40 hours of my time a week, and I gave them 4. So they had to do things in the school of hard knocks and kind of, they would literally meet with me for the 4 hours. I would say, yes, this direction, let's do this, connect with this. And then they would just have to go and do it. So I would say they did a lot of it. I gave them the capital, I gave them the connections, I gave them, the support, but they actually executed it.
Right.
So,
and you had a vision that this was going to grow as the privatization continued, that this was important.
I believed in Glass-Steagall. I believed in the separation of investment banking risk and commercial banking risk. Commercial banking risk, prudential, government-backed, FDIC insured, people-backed. Investment banking, you're at your own risk. Capital to be lost, bankruptcy to occur, separate risks, separate entities. You could have cross ownership, but it has to be Chinese walls. So we did those kind of things. So I created it in the image of Glass-Steagall, which we had in America at the time, by the way. It was
Right,
just
right. I
being unraveled.
remember. Yes.
It was
Yeah.
just being unraveled by Larry Summers and Phil Graham, but it was still, there. And Gramm-Leach Bliley amendment and all that occurred during that time. But I built it as believing in that principle and trying to help them as much as I could. But the bank alone needed 4 Peter Derby's time.
Yeah.
And then here, but I didn't want to hold them back either, right? I didn't want to say, you can only do like Yeltsin. You can only do what I approve. I hated that about Yeltsin because you can't approve everything. The whole country can't wait for your one approval because it just doesn't work that way. So I just said to them, you do whatever you guys need to do, and I'll meet with you consistently, at least it was usually twice a week. It was like 4 hours each time, and I would try to help them out quite a bit. And then if they had questions of material nature, they would come to me anyway on it, and that was part of our agreement. If it was really material, you'd come, and I gave them time when they needed it to do it. But they really had to be doing a lot on their own. And the timing was more intellectual building a database of foreign red herrings that you can then use as boilerplate, understanding, learning what it's about to figure out how we're going to do it when it starts up in 6 months or a year,
Right. Yeah.
And Dialog at that time, JV Dialog hired Troika as a first client to analyze each of their 15 city subsidiaries, how well they're running their operations, and whether we should create an internal stock exchange so that capital by the CFO at headquarters could be given out based on not you just wanting it, but based on who needed it more. It'd be like a capital markets, an internal capital markets where everybody, so you have $5 million at headquarters, everybody bids on it.
Yeah.
He offers 5% interest rate. He offers 7%, 12%, 20, 30%. We're allocated to the most returns. And so we created internally a document to create the internal dialogue, JV Dialog exchange, internal exchange with shares of capital amongst it, which then quickly never happened. Those documents went to the Ministry of Finance to create the Moscow Stock Exchange. The original Moscow Stock Exchange concept was JV Dialog's internal exchange. The same team went over there to do it. Pavel Tiplukin and that whole group. And Pavel there were two fellows, Pavel Tiplukin and Vladimir Kuznetsov, were CME students or Moscow State University students and CME students that went and got an MBA abroad, Columbia University MBA and London School of Economics. And they came back to CME, and the rector was the chairman of the bank. He gave us those people to run, like Pavel Tiplukin was helping to do the stock exchange analysis. Then he went over to Harvard, I think, for a program. And so, or back to London School of Economics for a program. And Vladimir came in to run the corporate finance group to write those first red herrings and things like that. And then he opened up Goldman Sachs's office for Goldman Sachs.
Wow.
Which is a little bit of a crazy story, how Goldman Sachs tried to take my entire company while they invited me to breakfast. They invited me to breakfast, had me wait there 2 hours for their London person to come. He never shows up. Then this assistant, when I was going to leave, said, no, he's coming. Doesn't come. I finally leave 2 hours later. I go over to Troika, and he interviewed all my employees at Troika to hire all of them. So he kept me out of Troika for 2 hours while he tried to hire all my employees. Wow. And even with that happening, we helped them open up their office because it was important to have a Goldman office. And they took Vladimir as their person. So they took our most senior guy, but all of the other employees stayed at Troika, did not go with Vladimir. He ended up hiring his own people. So that's the ethics. That's the ethics, unfortunately, that Goldman taught my first employees.
Right.
And that was not a good thing. And I tried to explain to them that was not a good thing that they did, but that's what they did. That's the facts.
Yeah, that's what they did. And yeah. And so what happened?
And by the way, we even helped Citibank open its offices in Moscow because they were one of the first licensed banks through the revolution.
Right.
And we helped them open up their offices and licensing processes. And after all of that, they tried to hire my Radisson branch manager and tried to pay her to take all my policies and procedure manuals, to steal them for their office, of which I ended up complaining to Paul Volcker, who I think got the guy fired in the end because he was on the board at the time. And we gave them our policies and procedures in the end. We said, look, don't bribe us. We'll help you because we need you here as a corresponding bank. They, in the end, became also a domestic bank and competed with us later, but it doesn't matter. Again, I needed 500 Dialog banks.
Right.
So both Citibank's unethical behavior as their first entrance into the marketplace and Goldman Sachs' unethical behavior as their first entrance into the marketplace really saddened me because it was not the example I wanted for Western institutions, how they gave birth to their Russian entities. And even with that, we still help them.
Wow. And do you think that kind of behavior then continued and sort of influenced the development of the markets?
Yes, because it continued from CSFB, it just continued. I mean, look, that's why we have the SEC.
Yeah.
That's why go look at the Foreign Corruption Practices Act and how in the last 10 years, the SEC has finally taken that pretty seriously and how many people have got caught up in that. And the issue comes down to, if you're in Rome, do as the Romans do. And if you're working in a country that the government is entirely corrupt because they know they're only there for 4 years, this is their only time to win the lottery and to make the money. And how are you going to run a business based on that? You know, that unfortunately, and it's, I mean, the classic, most of these companies have a domestic joint venture partner. The purpose of that joint venture partner is to grease the wheels.
Yeah.
And so for Foreign Corruption Practices Act, low-hanging fruit is look at every joint venture that has a domestic partner and then see the behavior of the domestic partner. And the foreigner just goes like this.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
nothing, see nothing, hear nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So look, to me, it was sad because it's the beginning of a market and you want to teach people how they should behave. You want to teach them etiquette. You want to teach them practices, policies. You want them to understand right and wrong, and you want them to do things, right? That's what you want to do. And those two institutions, or three for that matter, CSFB, I mean, they, you know, and the ones directly with us, they really didn't put their best foot forward. And I needed to say, we're going to help them because they're still great institutions. Their local people decided to go the quick way. The quick way is always not the right way.
Yeah.
The right way is the hard way. But let's forgive them, understand it was wrong, help them because we need the institution in general, and teach them the harder way or the right way is maybe just come and ask for help. And maybe you get the help. And in our case, we'll offer it to you. And so we kind of turned it around on them, right? And said, we're here to help you. And they were, okay. And I think our people understood that. And they also understood our culture and our deep committed passion to either do it the right way or not to do it. And like my grandmother used to say, do the right thing and whatever comes with it, comes with it. And let's do the right thing. Let's sleep well at night. And we have 3 tomatoes in the morning. Great. We have 20 tomatoes in the morning. Great. But we're not interested in getting the most tomatoes. We're interested in just doing the right thing, and everything else will be proportionate. And that's how we did it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened to the Dialog joint venture? What fate did it meet?
I don't know as of today, because when I left, it was still in existence. I know that the different branches of Dialog, some of them really did well. St. Petersburg did super well. Nizhny Novgorod, super well. Another one in Siberia, a city where Sasha was from, really well. There was a few instances where our director was murdered. In one instance, not clear exactly how. That was towards 1998 when I was already leaving, but I heard about that. the St. Petersburg one, Vitaly Savelyev was chairman now of Aeroflot. I think today he's the Minister of Transportation of Russia. So, they really they went into real estate, technology. And when I was there, they were basically a private equity group. The center just had all these, the regions got so big and so independent that somebody said, real estate's my biggest thing. I'm owning all the different buildings in town. Other ones said, I have great computer programmers. I'm doing computer programming. And so they kind of went off into their own pieces of strength. And the headquarters was kind of a private equity holding company of all these pieces. And they were still clients at the time that I left in 98.
In 98. Okay.
And today I don't know, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So they were operating like separate companies in all these different.
They got big enough that each one really did their own thing.
Yeah.
They were
okay. And then the bank Dialog.
So the bank itself. So then we had Troika Dialog.
Yeah.
We had DialogBank, and we created the Development and Restructuring Bank. It's called DRB, but it was Development Restructuring Bank. It was kind of like EBRD. And people at first gave me a hard time. It's like Derby Bank, DRB Bank, but it was really EBRD kind of concept.
Right.
And the reason is that when I worked on Wall Street at NatWest, I was part of the corporate finance team, and we also had a project finance team and a credit asset-backed lending team. And the asset-backed lending team was kind of unique. So we had instances where AT&T wanted to sell its phone systems. That's an asset-backed financing, and we could charge different risks. So I wanted to say there is corporate risk, general corporate risk, and then there's also asset-backed risk, mortgages, real estate-backed risk, leasing of equipment, trucks, cars risk. So it's a different kind of risk. Let's create the Development Restructuring Bank to bring about an expansion and get London and Washington, EBRD, World Bank, and other banks to fund this risk separate from the general corporate risk. And let's do leaseback finance, sale leasebacks, leasing financing, mortgage financing, and so on. So created this other bank. And then I had my son born in 93. I had my second born in 96. My wife kept saying, we only came for 1 year, and every year it's one more year. And now we're up to 6 years. We have 2 sons. One's going to soon go to kindergarten. He's not going to kindergarten with bodyguards. We need to go home.
Yeah.
So at that point, I started to think, okay, how am I going to free myself of this? So we thought possibly to sell the whole unit. And we started to work with the Ruben, I made president of Troika, to create leadership succession. Lipanian to head DialogBank, leadership succession. We started to get bids to buy everything. At the same time, I knew there were separate risks of each of the institution. Glass-Steagall, the U.S. is going to universal banking at this point. Glass-Steagall's gone. Blankly amendment, legislation is through, and the universal banking concept, Citibank, universal bank, all this stuff, European banks. But as I saw the analysis of bidders for the group, I realized they're going to keep Troika and they're going to spin off the bank. And I knew at that time the bank was the backbone. Without the bank, Troika couldn't be what it is. All of its credit line was from the bank. Tens and tens of millions of dollars of trading support was from the bank. All of the clients of Troika had accounts at the bank. The seamlessness for a client to send money and buy stock in, Rowie Yes or whatever was trading at the time, Gazprom, the only way they could do it is through this one-stop shopping. They don't know DialogBank, Troika. They simply know they send it, it's done, and it's taken care of.
Right.
When you break that apart, you may not have that seamlessness going forward anymore. So I realized it wasn't going to happen the best way and chose not to do it, and thought, okay, maybe Sberbank. So we had a discussion with Sberbank, and we went a very long way to the point where I thought we actually got our valuations between Sberbank and us. Sberbank was trading at the time. Only thing is Sberbank was trading around 600 million, and we were trading around value around 300 million, 250 to 300 million. So we would be close to over a third of the bank on a combined basis. And they decided, no, you can't be, you can only be 25 minus one share, because we can't have you owning such a big part of a state bank.
You have that golden share, right?
Yeah. So I said, that's okay. I'm okay with that. 25 less one share. And then my team at Troika said, no, this is a commercial bank. We can't do this. They don't understand our business. You're destroying Troika by doing this. We're all walking out. And in a nice way. They didn't say it maybe directly, but they basically said, you're leaving us at the realm of Soviet managers. And what are you going to do? Be like this honorary chairman showing up once a year back in New York? So you're throwing us into the wolf's den, and these people don't understand what we do anyway. This is bad, really bad. We oppose this.
Yeah.
So I backed off from this Sberbank deal. Looking back now, was probably the right deal. I should have then just stayed on for a few years, even though my wife and kids would have went back. And I think it would have been the best thing, because we would have been the private bank, the Coots of Sberbank.
Right.
And in the end, Troika was sold to Sberbank by my own employees that told me no.
Right.
So then we decided, they came to me and said, you taught us about leverage buyouts and things. We actually put one together. We got Bank of Moscow to buy out Troika itself. I know you think that's a problem because it's not with the bank, but now we have Bank of Moscow financing it. So if DialogBank doesn't continue to do things seamlessly for us, Bank of Moscow will. So either way, we got two opportunities, so don't worry about it. Let's do it. And let's do it at that same valuation, but just for Troika's piece of the valuation, which was the smaller piece at that time, pretty smaller piece of the whole of DialogBank at the time with Sberbank's analysis. And I said, okay. And I gave away 35% of the shareholding to the employees. And then my piece that was left, I gave to Ruben Vardanyan as a buyout with a loan from Bank of Moscow. So in a way, Bank of Moscow purchased it with the opportunity for the employees to buy it out at the time. So after giving away 35% to the general public, then I gave my piece to the leadership team to be bought out if they could from earnings of the bank, and then they would own it, which is what they did. And then DialogBank was standing on its own with its own capital bank, the restructuring bank. And we had several European banks come in to buy it. And my crew there also was a little worried at the bank because foreigners coming, they were worried about the Russians because they didn't understand private banking, private bank. And they were worried about the foreigners that as the wind blew, because 97 now happened, this is now spring of 98. As the wind blows, they can just shut it all down and close up shop and all that. So there was two good bids that we received, and both bids required that for 5 years I stay on as CEO, of which I chose not to do. So we decided that the employees would just simply run the bank, and I will still move to the US, open up a branch in the United States, and just, it is what it is. I always wanted it of the Russians, for the Russians, by the Russians, and it'll just grow. And the shareholders were still Moscow University, myself, JV Dialog. The employees had an ESOP program there already in place as well. And that was it. And then that was like in February, March. Then in April, May, we started to see the whole ruble collapsing and Sergei, Chernomyrdin quitting and getting thrown out as prime minister, Sergei Kirienko coming in, then the bank starting to lose Western financing, and then you had the whole collapse in August.
Right.
And with the August collapse, we were the only bank on the right side of the collapse. We had no forward contracts. We were completely solid.
On the other side were all the oligarch banks who did all these crazy forward contracts, you know, doing $200 million in forward contracts when they only had 50 million in capital because they figured, you know, they'll just get paid on $200 million of which they didn't have.
Right.
You know, people were willing to take that credit guarantee. So in the end, they decided to, instead of hold accountable the institutions that did what they did, the 5 or 6 of them decided to nuke the whole place. They created a financial nuclear winter, of which we got caught up in because we were on the right side of it. But once they blew it up, it didn't matter what side you were on. And then I went to the central bank and said, look, I was on the right side of everything. We are not involved in this. You, the central bank, just stole all our money. Not like in 91 when the Soviet Union collapsed and you told us we had to send all our money to the central bank. You just now froze my money. I was one of the 26 clearing banks, which means I had all my money in the central bank. You just froze all my money. And they said, you're right. Your balance sheet is good because it's only our debt, our guarantee. So, I mean, it's like we're not defaulting on our own money to you. So we'll give you liquidity. So I can't give you the access to the GKOs because we just froze them for everybody. So I can't make an exception to you. But what I'll do is I'll take as collateral that GKOs and give you a credit line on top of it because of your balance sheet. And so we created quantitative easing for the first time ever, like Bert Bernanke did in 2008.
Yeah.
We did it in 1998, and the central bank approved it. We got all the liquidity, so all my payments were working because I had all my foreign capital was still good. All the dollars were dollars, but all my ruble capital, and I was perfectly hedged. So all my ruble capital was good too, and I was using it as a percentage to clear payments. That lasted for about a month until the Russian government replaced the chairman of the central bank, Dubinin, and put the new one in. And he said, you know what, Peter, it's over. I'm not doing that because people are coming to me and asking me for what they did for you. They want quantitative easing. They want guarantees. We're not doing it. So that's it. Now I'm frozen. Now all my ruble clients are coming saying, yeah, why can't I make my payments?
Right.
So what we did was we went to the oil clients, and the oil clients basically said to them, you have all of these ruble obligations to the state for export taxes. So I'm going to transfer you the rubles. You give me the dollars that you would have needed to convert, and I will transfer for you these rubles to the tax authorities. And that's what we did for about 2 months. So we transferred the tax authorities the rubles because it was allowed. They had a tax account. The rubles were still transferring. And the money that we got from their exports, the dollars, we would convert from time to time into new rubles to make the payments for the Russian clients that had everything in rubles. And it was going great. Then the tax authorities come in with their masks and guns and lay down my entire accounting department on the floor saying, you transferred me rubles that we don't have access to because the central bank shut down rubles being transferred from all the banks, accounts. And so we got stuck again in that regard. And the Constitution allowed it. So at that point, the Russian banks decided to do what they called good bank, bad bank. So they went and they took all the bad stuff through it. And here, all the new money that the clients were having from new revenues and expenses were coming in again. So they did what was called good bank, bad bank. I decided I don't like this whole theory. I don't like doing dishonest things like this. This is not working out. And so at that point, I was thinking of just paying everybody back, shutting everything down. And some of the clients said, look, we don't want to stay at DialogBank through this. You have the restructuring bank. It's solid. There's no ruble, no payments, no GKOs in there. We want to open accounts there so we can continue without any problems. So we did. So a lot of the clients did move over in de facto, I guess, good, bad, bad bank issue, even though that wasn't the way we didn't set it up for, but that's the thing.
Right.
And I made a decision at that point. I'm out.
Yeah.
This is not the way this is going to go. They're starting to hit us up with tax police coming in, threatening to put all my executives in jail. All of this isn't happening. So what we did was we basically liquidated DialogBank by paying everybody out, shutting it down, giving the license, because the judges were foreclosing, the tax authorities were foreclosing on us. So in essence, the tax authorities stole the bank, stole the assets of the bank, stole the buildings, stole the shares, everything. And in the meantime, before they completed the steal, we tried to get everybody out so that it was only on. So if you're going to steal it, you're going to be the only creditor left. You're
Yeah.
not going to steal it and then not give the others. So we got as much as we possibly could, which I'd say 99% of everybody out, with only obligations to the tax authorities, and their theft was basically what our equity was. And they stole quite a bit. They stole, I think, from us, maybe $250 million in the end.
Wow.
At that time.
And this was 98. Huh?
98. And all the banks today are worth around $6 billion. So they probably stole an institution that would have been worth $6 to $10 billion in the end. That's what they destroyed.
Wow.
So we shut that down. They took it over. They stole it all. And the other bank, the restructuring bank, actually, Social General bought the bank. They wanted the license, they wanted the mortgage lending and all of that. And the idea was that IFC would finance it, because IFC was financing already gave us a credit line prior to that. So IFC came in, Social General bought it. And to this day, I think GE Capital then bought it, I think parts of it since then. And I left. I said, okay, Troika already sold to the employees. This bank was going to run for a while, support Troika, still be there. Because of Glass-Steagall, they wanted me to own a piece of Troika. I said no, because I didn't want to, because DialogBank itself was starting to build its own trading desk. So I didn't want to feel like I was conflicted. So I said no, but thank you. I was going to even be on their advisory board. And I said, no, I think, if I'm advising DialogBank how to grow it, I can't really do this for conflict of interest. But we kept them as a strong client. I mean, the relationship as a pure client continued going forward. And so I was left at that point so I came back to Russia after the collapse in 98 for 3 years to work out this liquidation aspect. And in July of 2001 is when I left and said, ciao.
Yeah.
This is the collapse of Western advice. It's
Wow.
started with it's the little crinks in the armor was some of the behavior of Western institutions coming in. Those were not good, little chinks in the armor. The forming of the oligarchs in July of 95, big chink in the armor.
Yeah.
Before that, choosing Gaidar's path of economic reform was the second chink in the armor. Creating the oligarchs in 95 in July was a third chink in the armor. I think the whole U.S. policy collapse and Russians no longer admiring or trusting the West or America was maybe the fourth, and then the collapse in 98 was the fifth.
Yeah. Wow.
And then the Americans were there. I mean, David Lipton and Larry Summers, the Russian central bank said, look, I need help. Here's what I need to try to keep this afloat. These banks made all these bets on the ruble rate. I can't hold the ruble rate because that's Mother Nature right now. And I need either a huge line of credit to hold it, because if I can't hold it, these banks go bankrupt. And the Americans said, and the Russians thought they would not let a nuclear power go under, just like long-term capital management.
Right.
But David Lipton said, sorry, I got word from the US, we're not helping you. And at that moment, the Russians drew down the IMF 4.7 billion, I think it was. They maxed out on the IMF credit line, drew the money down, and then the next day blew the whole thing up.
Yeah.
None of that needed to happen.
Yeah. Wow.
So from helping to create the entire capital market system from its early seed to using the scissor to chop off its head at the end.
Yeah. So have you followed the development of that system since then? I mean, this was a painful experience.
Yeah, I kind of I was it.
Yeah.
To go. I mean, Andrei Kozlov continued. As I said, he was murdered, unfortunately. He was one of the guys that really demanded integrity in the system, and they killed him for it. The Foreign Volunteer Corps, what is it? The Financial Volunteer Corps really did help a lot more things out. I think they did work there. They probably know better what that all is. Andy Spindler was head of that. So I thought that was with John Whitehead and Paul Volcker and Bill Donaldson. They did a lot of things. And then they went outside of Russia. They went into Mongolia and Ukraine and Georgia, Armenia, and things like that. But they're the ones that kept up with it. I kind of washed my hands and said, when the core isn't right, I believe in sustainable, ethical wealth creation. And I think maximized wealth creation can only be done in an ethically sustainable way. And when I feel that that is not the case, you're compromised. It's like joining a club, and before joining it, you have to do something that you're so embarrassed that they got you at any time in the future. Yeah. I want freedom to choose every day of who I want to be with and how I want to be there, and I don't want to be compromised. And I just felt it was better to say, I'm no longer happy with this, and I'm going to pay you out, and you're all going to find something else, and I'm no longer going to spend my sweat equity to do this. Yeah. And I offer, the institution, for the others to do it. I already transferred to Boris Apianin. He was the president of it. I was just chairman. So I was asking them, but they were under threat to go to jail. They were constantly being the KGB and the tax police and thrown in the courts. So two of them had to flee the country because they were worried that this, our liquidation was going to happen in time and all that. And I think in the end, it was a mutual decision for everybody.
Yeah. And during this period, did any of the dialogue people, the people you began with, they weren't able to help with the government? They weren't able to lobby on your behalf
No, they were doing their own thing. At that point, they wanted us to fund so many of their projects, and they were not getting credit. The credit committee was saying, no, this isn't good enough. That's not good enough. We're not going to do it. Let's just say they didn't think DialogBank was their pocket bank. It wasn't and never was. For clearing and banking services, yet, but for financing, it wasn't simply, you're my bank, give me the money. You needed to go, and some people got it, some people didn't. So there was more of an arm's length relationship with them at that point. And so, they just wanted to make sure their equity, they were going to get through the bankruptcy liquidation, they were going to get their piece, and that was it. And they actually already started to sell down their piece even before this. When Troika was sold, they were like, okay, we're going to sell down some of our piece too. And they did it we bought it back in a treasury stock purchase for employees. Created the employee stock option plan that way.
Yeah.
So they were kind of arm's length. I think they were willing to go to court and help us a bit, but they weren't. There was not much help, because I actually helped the tax police be formed, right? So the tax police was formed with 2 KGB generals. I met with those 2 people in their first weeks on the job back in 1990, even 91, with Yaroshenko. And I knew them, and I went to them, and they tried to go to the Moscow head of the tax police. And in the end, one of our clients had the daughter of the head of the tax police working there. One of our American joint venture, it was a US joint venture, had the daughter of the tax police head in Moscow work there. And our president, in the meeting, to say, look, we're having a difficult time. We're trying to work this through, but the tax authority is constantly coming with masked men and butchering and, are telling all our women to lay down on the floor, and, and he was disgusted with them. So the daughter told her dad that DialogBank's president thinks you guys are beasts and are doing things incorrectly. So there was zero chance to change his view about DialogBank. I had the federal head of the tax police tell him to stop because it's not right. I had the head of the parliament committee say, stop, this isn't right. And him telling them to take a hike. It's personal. They accused my men of coming in. And the fact was they did come in and laid our people out.
Yeah.
And they were doing it on behalf of two Russian clients who probably did pay them to do it, you know, because they wanted their payments right away. They didn't want us to wait for this thing with the oil companies to figure it out and all of that. And so he got personally offended and we couldn't back him off. And at that point, there was no backing him off. And so they were confiscating and stealing our bank. So it was clear to me that's what's happening. It was clear to my guys that's what's happening. And they had a choice to fight it and possibly end up in jail or flee the country while I liquidated it. And that's what we did.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's an amazing story. You know, have you told this story in this way?
No, never. That's
Never.
not, you know, never.
Okay. Okay. And wow. Well, thank you for being willing to tell me the story because it is an amazing story. And there's so much, it's so rich a story, if you will. I'm going to have to figure out how to use it and get your permission about this because
Yeah, I mean, the positive side is interpersonal relationships, sincerity, integrity, good meaning, you know, really intellectual work, and building a bond with people who are going to do something is really important, right?
Yeah.
Like the president of China today, you knew he was going to be president 10 years ago, right? During the Obama administration, Obama said, look, Biden, be friends with this guy. In a few years, he's going to be president of China, right? So knowing the people that are kind of coming up and somehow meeting them on the right terms, the right just happenstance, and it just works out, and there's trust and their desire, your desire, it all works, right?
Yeah.
Those personal relationships matter. DialogBank got shut down because of a bad personal relationship, right? We had a president who went into a meeting. I wasn't there. He expressed his frustration and his shock and demise of the behavior of the local tax police being shaken down like the mafia by these people with no understanding of what's really going on, no intellectual nothing. And that heard by a daughter who tells her father, whose father says, I'm taking revenge. And then no one could stop him. Literally nobody could stop him unless it was, you know, Putin at the time.
Right.
Coming in, which, you know, it just wasn't going to happen, right? His commitment was a commitment. And so, you know, everything that happened wonderfully happened because of personal relationship.
Yeah.
And the collapse happened because of a bad, not with me. With me, the wonderful stuff happened because of my wonderful relationship. The bad one was somebody else's within my team, the president, who trusted. He just came back from getting his MBA. I sent him to MIT to get his MBA because Citibank's chairman, also John Reed, was an MIT grad that was head of Citibank. So, and he was an IT guy. He ran all of our IT, former smart young KGB guy, as I mentioned, you know, brilliant kid. And he came back with his MBA in June, the collapse in August. He now takes over after, you know, he ran it for a few months, got his MBA, came back, and now I was running it for a few months while I left. And all of a sudden this all happens. And during this 3 years I was there, he was going to visit clients as the president to tell them how we were going to try to come out of this.
Right.
Unfortunately, he expressed his true view, but sad view, and the person in the room, that not knowing that, created the complete collapse and theft of the bank. So, so a personal relationship killed it as a personal relationship started it. So,
yeah. Wow.
No different than Bear Stearns going down, by the way. That was a personal relationship that made sure Bear Stearns wasn't coming out either.
Huh.
A personal relationship that somebody was offended at previous behaviors. That therefore wasn't willing to help him.
Yeah.
And waited for them to collapse. And then a few hours after they collapsed, they helped all the other banks. So why didn't they do it a few hours earlier? Because it was personal.
Because it was personal. Yeah.
Personal. So it happens in the West too. This is not a Soviet. I'm not trying to say Soviets are bad, But I'm
Right.
just trying to say the importance. If you want to have ingredients of reform, personal. Ingredients of collapse, sometimes personal too. Yes, maybe you over leverage yourself, pure business move. You bet the market the wrong way. It's over. I agree. That's part of it. But
Yeah.
sometimes it's personal. And my story is that entire timeline, right? I mean,
Right.
I was one of the very first ones to help.
Right.
I helped really well at the core of the changes.
Right.
I allowed fruit to flourish. Like Troika on their own grew a lot. I mean, Troika's main success was the people at Troika. They're the ones that did it. I gave them a few avenues. If they didn't take them, nothing would have happened. So I'm not taking credit for Troika's real flourishing because it was done by them. I'm taking the credit for their guidance and giving them the resources to take to go there. But
Right.
they went there, right? I didn't do the work for them. They did it. And then as the overarching mood towards America changed, things changed. The collapse with America pulling the rug out from under it for good reason. I mean, too, they were like, look, we're just not going to keep supporting this behavior. That collapse created about, the other things. And then how the personal relationship just collapsed here too.